traditional Chinese empire, relations with neighbors were based on what's called the tributary state system, in which China was recognized as being culturally superior, and people periodically sent tribute and received gifts, and it was a way of governing foreign trade, regulating foreign trade, and maintaining a peaceful relationship. And the identity of the people in traditional Chinese culture was their culture itself, not national. National is an invention of the government. It's an invention of the nation-state system. The traditional value, most important in social terms in East Asia, would be harmony, maintaining a harmonious and stable relationship among the people. But they distinguish between harmony and autonomy, which is being the same, identity, conformity. This is a quotation from Confucius. It says that a noble person seeks harmony, but not sameness. A petty person seeks sameness, but not harmony. We could see this as a defense of plurality. That is, in the tradition, there was a statesman who said that a good cook who wants to make a delicious dish with fish will combine all the different flavors in such a way that they don't disappear, but they create something new. And that is harmony. Whereas the sameness is like adding water to improve the taste of water. The last time I heard this quote, it was by a Chinese diplomat in Manila back in March to explain why China should not have to follow the instructions given by the West and why the West shouldn't try to give instructions to China. It establishes a continuity between the Confucian text of more than 2,000 years and contemporary Chinese thinking and philosophy. So in modernity, we can wonder to what extent the Chinese tradition rules rather than the Western. Modernity in the West began with the Spanish, Portuguese, Dutch, and French empires. The United Kingdom, the British Empire, over 200 years turned the British Empire into the superpower in the world. Over 100 years, in the 19th century, the United States became an empire, fought various wars in Mexico, against the Indians, against Spain, etc. When Germany united at the end of the 19th century, and when Japan modernized at the end of the 19th century, and they examined what had made Western powers powerful, the answer was very simple. They industrialized. And the way they were able to industrialize was they had colonies that supplied raw materials cheaply and gave them a guaranteed market for expensive products. Without imperialism, capitalism couldn't have functioned. So the obvious thing to do for Germany and Japan was to create empires. But they were already imperialists in the blood and that led to the two world wars. A similar thing happened with Russia. From the point of view of realism as an international relations theory, the emergence of a new superpower always destabilizes the world order and leads to war. And what's clear from that first graph is that China is emerging as a superpower, an economic superpower. A very peculiar kind of economic superpower, because in terms of its GDP, it might already be the number 2 GDP in the world. Or it might still be Japan, they're very, very close. But in terms of its GDP per capita, China is as poor as Angola or the Congo. So for the first time in history, we have an economic superpower which is a poor country. It's also difficult to talk about China as a country. It has 1,300 million people. Italy has 80 million. How many people in Italy? 60 million. 15. Italy belongs to the G7. China doesn't. So one of the questions about the crisis of modernity in China is actually a question of the crisis of China and modernity for the rest of the world. Does the emergence of China represent a threat to world order? To which we could also add India. Chinese will say no. The risks of modernity from a Chinese perspective, now that China is industrializing, can be examined on two fronts: internal risks. Modernizing itself is leading to centrifugal socioeconomic forces. There are some parts that are more wealthy, some parts that are more poor. Ethnic conflicts, uneven development among regions, corruption, which is calculated by Chinese economists as a white GDP, which is negative, organized crime, maintaining the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party to govern, scarcity of raw materials, environmental degradation, epidemics, a new kind of ultranationalism, social welfare costs, aging population, and the democratization of a large country. Davao means a large country, as opposed to Xiaoqi Davao, which means a superpower. But China is a large country. It's the third largest territory in the world after Canada and after Russia and Canada, and it's the largest population in the world until India catches up. How do you democratize a large country in which half the population has just emerged out of poverty? And what happens if China is unable to develop a domestic consumer market? You may know that there has been a strike at a Honda factory in China. And in order to put an end to the strike, they've had to raise the salaries of workers. And China is no longer the best place to go for cheap labor. Now, that's a necessary development in China, because if they cannot survive on exports, because other countries will be able to offer cheaper labor sooner or later. They could return to what they used to have, which is a kind of autarky, which they had a domestic market which was sufficient to absorb all their production. In order for that domestic market to exist in China today, the people living in the countryside have to have purchasing power. Therefore, there has to be a redistribution of wealth for the very survival of China. In a curious way, the solution to China's future, the solution to the crisis of learning in China, is exactly the same whether you look at it from a liberal point of view or from a socialist point of view. What modernity represents as a risk in China from outside are obstacles to regionalization, ethnic conflicts, cross-border conflicts, international terrorism, crime, etc. A whole series of these external risks. One of the most interesting of which is the danger of the Latin Americanization of China. Many Chinese economists have studied what happened in Latin America as a result of the Washington Consensus. What they saw was a destruction of social values, traditional values, by a rapid urbanization, creating slums around the major cities, in which people had lost any contact with their roots or their value systems, leading to crime, poverty, and social instability, and a constant low level of violence that impedes development. As a conclusion, they decided that they don't want to see that happen in China. Therefore, no Washington Consensus for China. And even a reversal of the policy of urbanizing China by trying to keep people living in the countryside.